November 15th, 1325. The sun is dying over the hills of northern Italy, and a man they call the Sparrow is about to destroy the largest army in the region with a force 1/5 its size. Rinaldo Bonacolsi stands barely 5.5 feet tall in his mail hauberk, a compact knot of ferocity on a warhorse that looks too big for him, scanning 30,000 enemy soldiers spread across the slope below the castle of Zappolino. The Pope has declared this man a heretic. Every Christian on earth has been offered crusader-level indulgences, the same spiritual rewards you'd earn for liberating Jerusalem if they can manage to kill him, and he is smiling. Because those 30,000 men just split their army on his orders, they just don't know it yet. This is the Battle of Zappolino. The story of how a bucket became the most expensive trophy in Italian history, and how victory destroyed the man who won it. Before we get into this, if you're enjoying deep dives into history's strangest battles, hit subscribe. Drop a comment where you're watching from. That like button does more than you think. All right. The dumbest war of the Middle Ages. In pop culture, medieval Italian warfare gets depicted as romantic. Knights jousting, banners fluttering, honor. That is nonsense, pure and simple. 14th-century Italy was a network of city-states locked in perpetual civil war, divided by an ideological split that makes modern partisan politics look like a book club disagreement. Guelphs backed the Pope. Ghibellines backed the Holy Roman Emperor. Think of it like this. Imagine every major American city picking a side in a political argument and then trying to burn the neighboring city to the ground every few years. That was northern Italy for 3 centuries. Modena was Ghibelline. Bologna was Guelph, 30 miles apart, a killing ground. In 1296, Bologna invaded Modenese territory and seized 2 border towns with papal blessing. Modena seethed. By 1312, a new player had literally purchased for 20,000 gold florins, control of Modena from the emperor. Rinaldo Passerino Bonacolsi, Lord of Mantua, Lord of 3 other cities, the most dangerous small man in Italy. There was nothing small about his cruelty. Years earlier, he'd promised safe passage to the previous Lord of Modena, Francesco Pico, then tracked him down, stripped him and his 2 sons naked, tied them to the backs of mules, and paraded them through the streets while crowds whipped and stoned them. Then he locked all 3 in a tower without food or water. The tower became the Torre della Fame, the Tower of Hunger. Remember that name, it comes back. By summer 1325, the border was bleeding openly. In July, Bolognese raiders burned Modenese farmland for 2 weeks, firing crossbows at the city walls for laughs. The Sparrow bribed the commandant of Montevideo, Bologna's most important border fortress, and took it without a fight. This wasn't a provocation, it was a declaration. Now, you've heard this war started because Modenese soldiers stole a bucket from a Bolognese well. That is the greatest piece of medieval propaganda ever written, and it fooled people for 700 years. The bucket wasn't stolen before the war. It was taken after the battle as a trophy, scooped from a well outside the Porta San Felice. The real cause was Montevideo. The real cause was centuries of hatred. But in 1622, a Modenese poet named Alessandro Tassoni wrote a mock epic called La Secchia Rapita that turned the bloodbath into a comedy, and the comedy replaced the history. The war that killed 2,000 men has been remembered as a joke about a pail ever since. The men at Zappolino weren't laughing. Bologna called in favors across Guelph, Italy. Troops arrived from Florence, Romagna, the Papal States. For their commander, they chose Malatestino Novello Malatesta, Lord of Rimini, freshly knighted in 1324, grandson of the man Dante called the Old Mastiff, barely into his 20s with exactly 1 battlefield victory to his name. Bologna was betting its survival on a young noble with more pedigree than experience. The Sparrow assembled a Ghibelline coalition. Azone Visconti of Milan sent German heavy cavalry, professional soldiers in full mail and early plate, the military elite of their era, men who made Italian militias look like armed civilians. Because that's what Italian militias were. Can Grande della Scala, the legendary big dog of Verona, Dante's patron, a warrior since age 14, whose equestrian tomb would show him smiling in tournament armor for eternity, rode to Modena in person. He assessed the situation, saw the plan taking shape, and left before the battle. Nobody knows exactly why. The big dog departed, and the Sparrow was on his own. The numbers. Bologna fielded roughly 30,000 infantry and 2,500 cavalry. Modena had 5,000 foot and 2,800 horse, 5-1 in infantry. But this wasn't a numbers game. It was a quality game, and the difference would be measured in bodies. The night before, Bonacolsi sent a detachment north to the Panaro River, making enough noise to suggest his entire army was crossing to flank Bologna. The Bolognese command bought it completely, peeling off a massive portion of their force to block the crossing. The largest army in the region voluntarily cut itself in half. Now, here's where you need to appreciate how absurd this gets. Imagine you're a Bolognese militiaman, you're a baker, maybe a tanner. Your one weapon is a spear your grandfather made, and the leather cap on your head is the closest thing you own to a helmet. You've been told you're on a righteous crusade, blessed by the Pope himself, against a heretic the size of a child. You have been standing in a field since morning, your feet hurt, you're cold. Nobody has fed you since yesterday. You have 30,000 comrades. It's going to be fine. And then your officers start screaming, "Turn around, go back. The enemy isn't where we thought. Half your army is gone, sent north on a wild chase, and now they need to come back, but the roads are narrow and there are thousands of men on them. Your formation doesn't exist anymore. You're standing in a crowd, not an army. The sun is setting. You can hear hoofbeats, but from the wrong direction. And the guy next to you, another baker, another tanner, is looking at you with an expression that says he too has just realized that being blessed by the Pope doesn't actually make you any better at fighting." This wasn't a battle formation. It was a traffic jam with swords. Meanwhile, a defector named Gangalando Bertucci, a Bolognese exile who'd switched sides and brought intimate knowledge of how Bologna organized its cavalry, was saddling up for the most devastating flanking attack in 14th-century Italian warfare. He rode a destrier armored in chain and boiled leather, carrying a lance he'd soon point at men he once called neighbors. This wasn't a traitor driven by ideology. This was a man with a grudge, given the keys to his former city's destruction. The weight. The field at Zappolino sits in gentle Emilian hill country, landscape that today produces Lambrusco and Parmigiano, designed for postcards, not massacres. The castle of Zappolino crouched on the hill above, the last fortification on the road to Bologna. Below it, on the slope descending from the ridge called Bersagliera, the Bolognese spread across the Prati di Soletto. Mid-November. The air is cold and damp, the kind of chill that seeps through quilted linen and settles in the joints. 5,000 Modenese infantry stand on the plain near Ziribega, breathing steam, gripping weapons they actually know how to use. Behind them, 2,800 cavalry, many of them German men-at-arms in full mail and early plate, riding heavy war horses bred for impact. The weight of a mounted German knight in 1325, rider, armor, weapons, saddle, barding, ran roughly 1,200 pounds. When that hits an unarmored man at a gallop, it doesn't wound him, it erases him. Across the field, the Bolognese scramble to reorganize. Men sent north to block the fake river crossing are streaming back, breathless, sweating through their gambesons in the November chill, trying to slot into formations that no longer exist. Officers on horseback scream orders that contradict other officers' orders. Malatestino Malatesta is about to command the largest battle of his life, with half his army still jogging back from a decoy. Bonacolsi sees the chaos, sees the gaps, knows that if he waits one more hour, the numbers will reform and bury him. He gives the order. The collision. Modenese mercenary infantry hits the Bolognese center first. Not a pretty movie charge, but a wedge of professionals driving into a mass of militia who've been standing in a field since morning, who are hungry, cold, and watching their reinforcements stumble in from the wrong direction. The Bolognese front rank carried spears and improvised polearms. Their armor, padded gambesons, quilted linen jackets designed to stop slashing cuts, nearly useless against a direct heavy thrust. When a Modenese professional drove his weapon forward, the gambeson slowed nothing. Force went through padding, through cloth, through ribs. The front rank crumpled, but the Bolognese fought back, hard. This wasn't a massacre, not yet. Numbers count in a press, and they had enormous numbers. Spearmen braced weapons against the advance and pushed. Men in the second and third ranks grabbed at enemy polearms, snapping oak shafts, hauling soldiers off balance, pulling them forward into the crowd where weight could crush them. Militiamen dropped their spears entirely and went for belt knives, targeting the gaps every experienced fighter knows: the exposed throat above a gorget, the soft inner thigh below a mail skirt, the armpit where no plate could reach. A 4-inch blade in a desperate hand could end a professional as easily as an amateur. The Modenese advance stalled, the center held, grinding, bleeding, but standing. The grind. For 30 minutes, the plain at Zappolino became a compression chamber. Men packed so tightly they couldn't swing swords, couldn't raise shields, could barely breathe. The sound wasn't the clean ring of steel on steel you hear in films. It was grunting, screaming, the wet crack of wood breaking against bone, the particular noise of bodies being pushed beyond their capacity to remain upright. Dust rose even in November's damp air, kicked up by thousands of feet churning earth into a slick of mud. The killing in a medieval press happened at knife range. Men couldn't swing, no room. They stabbed, gouged, kneed, elbowed. The man in front of you was your enemy. The man behind you was shoving you into him. And somewhere in that compression, the weight of bodies itself became a weapon. Men suffocated standing up, crushed by the pressure of their own comrades. This is where Albertino Boschetti died, a Modenese exile fighting for Bologna, born in the very city whose army was killing him. His body went unrecognized by his former countrymen. In this battle, brother fought brother literally. Guelph Modenese exiles against Ghibelline Modenese loyalists across a spear's length of churned ground. This wasn't Bologna against Modena, it was Italy against itself. The kill. Then Bertucci's cavalry arrived. 2,800 horsemen swept around the Bolognese left in a wide arc. Bertucci, who knew exactly how Bolognese cavalry commanders positioned themselves because he'd been one, threaded the gap between their horse and their foot like a needle through cloth. Malatestino's cavalry, tangled with the recall from the river feint, never intercepted him. German knights in full armor drove into Bolognese infantry from behind, men who didn't know they were there until a 1,200-pound warhorse crushed the person standing beside them. Lances shattered on impact, the force transferring through oak shafts into bodies with no steel to stop it. The cavalry drew swords and hacked downward into a crowd that had no room to turn, no room to raise weapons, no room to run. The killing was mechanical, professional, thorough. The break. The collapse started at the rear and rippled forward like a shockwave. Men who could see the cavalry coming turned and ran. Their flight crashed into men still fighting, still holding what was left of the formation, and the line dissolved in minutes. The retreating infantry stumbled backward into their own crossbowmen, positioned behind the lines for ranged support, filling their firing arcs with friendly bodies. They couldn't shoot, they couldn't reload. Then, the Modenese were on top of them. The slaughter. The rout covered miles. Some men reached the castle at Zappolino. Others made the fortress at Oliveto. The rest ran all the way to Bologna, staggering through the Porta San Felice as night fell, many having thrown away their weapons to run faster. Bertucci's cavalry pursued almost to the city gates. They would have broken into Bologna itself, but his men stopped to loot the suburbs, sacking houses, stripping the dead. That pause, that greed saved a city. 2,000 dead across the valley. To put that in perspective, the Battle of Hastings, which decided the fate of England, killed roughly the same number. Zappolino involved more total troops than Hastings and accomplished precisely nothing permanent. 26 Bolognese nobles were captured, including Malatestino Malatesta himself, the young captain general dragged to Modena in chains, imprisoned for 11 weeks before being ransomed. His war ended in 2 hours. The Modenese advanced to Bologna's walls, destroying 6 castles and demolishing the dam that fed the city's water supply. Then came the Palio, a sporting tournament staged directly beneath the walls, in full view of citizens still waiting to learn if their families were alive. Horse races, jousting, athletic competitions. 4 separate events over multiple days. The Latin record, ad aeternam memoriam premissorum et aeternam Bolognensium scandalum, to the eternal shame of Bologna. Then soldiers walked to a well outside the Porta San Felice, drew up an oaken bucket, and carried it home like a captured battle standard. That bucket hangs in Modena to this day. The original sits in the Palazzo Comunale. A replica hangs in the Torre della Ghirlandina, the cathedral bell tower visible from every direction. 700 years, they haven't given it back. But here is what the bucket story hides. The Sparrow won the battle and lost everything else. This wasn't a triumph, it was the beginning of an unraveling. In January 1326, barely 2 months later, the Bolognese bribed him. They paid, in installments that were never fully completed, to have every castle, every fortress, every inch of territory returned to the status quo. The war that killed 2,000 men produced exactly 0 lasting territorial change. The only permanent acquisition was a wooden pail. Then his world collapsed, beat by beat. Parma submitted to the papal legate. Reggio followed. In 1327, Modena itself, the city he'd bought, fought for, and bled for, expelled him. The citizens decided he was too expensive, too dangerous, too hated by the Pope to keep. On August 16, 1328, the Gonzaga family, his own relatives, his own allies, launched a coup in Mantua. Luigi Gonzaga smuggled 800 Veronese soldiers into the city. Passerino Bonacolsi fled to the Cathedral of San Pietro. They found him among the pews. Alberto di Saviola delivered the killing blow. The man who could not be beaten on a battlefield died on church stone, surrounded by God's furniture. And then the detail that elevates this from history to nightmare. The Gonzaga mummified his body. For 300 years, the corpse of Passerino Bonacolsi sat in the Palazzo Ducale in Mantua, displayed in a cabinet of curiosities alongside a stuffed crocodile, an armadillo, and what someone claimed was a unicorn horn. The most feared warlord of his generation, a conversation piece between a reptile and a myth. His sons and grandsons were locked in the Tower of Hunger, the same tower where he had starved the Pico family alive. Niccolo Pico, son of his victim, arranged it personally. They died the same way. The medieval world had a long memory and no interest in mercy. Here is the moment I keep coming back to. The moment that isn't a battle scene, isn't a death, and hits harder than all of them. 300 years after the battle, a boy named Alessandro Tassoni climbed the stairs of the Ghirlandina Tower in Modena with his grandfather. They went to see the bucket, just a wooden pail, darkened with age, in a room with 15th-century frescoes on the walls. His grandfather told him the story, the battle, the dead, the absurdity of it all. A boy, orphaned young, raised by this old man, standing in a bell tower looking at a piece of oak that 2,000 men had died around. And something settled in him that didn't surface for 50 years. In 1622, Tassoni published La Secchia Rapita, 12 cantos of mock epic verse that transformed the deadliest pitched battle in 14th-century Italy into a comedy, complete with Olympian gods choosing sides and Bolognese nobles offering entire towns to get their bucket back. It became the first great mock heroic poem in European literature. It influenced Boileau. It influenced Pope. It worked. The comedy erased the tragedy. 2,000 dead became a footnote to a joke. A boy looked at a bucket and decided the story was funnier than it was sad, and 400 years of people believed him. History doesn't remember the victors or the defeated. It remembers whoever tells the better story. And the better story is almost never the true one. If that changes how you think about the last war you read about, I've done my job. Subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.